I've used Sonic the Hedgehog characters a bunch of times on this channel in the past, usually when I'm taking famous video game characters and turning them into something, but I've never done a full dedicated Sonic episode. So I figured since the second movie comes out today, it was the perfect time to correct that. And since it's something that's been requested so many times, I'd just go with a PopCross classic sort of topic, taking Sonic the Hedgehog characters and turning them into dragons. I know that does technically make this the second dragon episode of the week, but the first dragon episode was kind of different. All the lore was written by artificial intelligence, and it was pretty ridiculous and goofy. This is gonna be more of a traditional PopCross Dragons kind of episode. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. I was recently told by a friend of mine about an island that used to float high above the Pacific Ocean. She told me how the island had recently fallen to ocean level after a client of hers stole a mystical green gem from the island to have it turned into a suit of armor. My friend, Vasilia, later regretted crafting this armor from the gem, but all the same it made me curious about this island, so I set off to explore it and see what kinds of creatures resided there and how the movement of their home may have affected them. I quickly found, after arriving, that there were multiple species of dragon on the island that resembled others I'd seen, but were indeed unique species to this no longer flying island. The first dragon I observed is a species I've named the Sonic Soaring Wyverns. These dragons proved able to fly so fast that they could break the sound barrier, and when they reached their peak speeds, their bodies would ignite with blue lightning, somewhat like the sparking Dreku species from Japan. These creatures came across as very playful and friendly. They'd interact with other dragons and creatures on the island in a generally gentle way, but would also protect smaller creatures of the island from being hunted by some of the resident predators. While these dragons clearly have teeth evolved for chewing meat, the only thing I observed them consuming were strange bananas that I'd never seen anywhere other than on this island. Of course, commonly, bananas grow in a semicircle sort of shape, but these bananas on the island grow as full circles, appearing like large yellow rings. A curious appetite for a species that appeared very powerful with aggressive potential, but overall I did find these creatures to be very pleasant towards myself and most residents of the island. Though, after being there for some time, I met a man on the island who many of the species clearly did not like. Now, a lot of my dragons recently have been on the weirder side, and for this episode I was like, I've done lots of weird dragons lately. For Sonic and some of the others in this episode, I'm just gonna go with a classic dragon sort of form. So with this, I was just like, Sonic as a wyvern, nothing fancy about it, and I am so glad I did that. I've done this funny curve with my dragon videos, where when I started after the first 5 or so, I started to get a little bit bored of drawing generic kind of shaped dragons and started making them weirder and weirder, and now I've come back around to a point where drawing a more traditional looking dragon like this, with just a bit of Sonic inspiration to it, felt really nice and refreshing. I really love how this one turned out. There's nothing fancy about it, but I just think it looks super cool. Also, anyone who saw the fictional artifacts as fantasy armor episodes will know where that Master Emerald fantasy armor came from, the setup for the lore in this episode. I'll link it in the cards, but also point out that there is a Multiverse Tales canonical error in there, where in that episode I have the narrator Vasilia say that she learned about the Skylands from Tayrin, the narrator of these episodes. That's not true, and I correct it in a later episode, my Fairy Tales as Legendary Warriors episode. 2 episodes a week and juggling lots of different characters, sometimes I forget my own lore. My bad. Anyway, let's take a look at the Sonic Dragon. Unexpectedly in my travels around the island, I met a man who referred to himself as Sir Roberto Nick. I asked him in what kingdom he'd been knighted to acquire the title of Sir, but he never gave me a proper answer, and I think it's entirely possible he'd just decided to give himself the moniker of Sir. He was a tall, rotund man with, admittedly, the most glorious mustache I'd ever seen. He said he'd been on the island for decades, and, not to be rude, but he did seem like a man who'd spent decades away from any other humans. When I was traversing the island with him, I finally started to see some very aggressive behavior from the creatures. generally, targeted towards us. We were attacked by a creature that he referred to as a brawling echidnasaur, though I'm not sure where he was getting the name Echidna from, as the creature in no way resembled echidnas. It was a 20-foot tall red dragon with spiked fists, which it used as its main source of attack, reminding me somewhat of the bald fist swinger. This dragon had short, gliding wings, more like something you'd see from a sea drake, but it did prove able to fly with them after getting a significant running start. At quite high running speeds, I might add. We fled to a cavern stronghold that Sir Nick had turned into his home, and were safe there from the creature. He told me the echidnasaurs had always been aggressive, but had become far more so since the island's core emerald had been taken, as this species had generally, instinctively, guarded the gem. He also told me there were 7 other mystical emeralds on the island, and that he'd collected 3 of them in his time there. With the full set, he said he could allegedly manipulate time itself, but it was hard to take the things he said at face value, as his sanity always seemed to be a bit in flux. He took me through the cave to show me the 3 gems he'd collected, and also revealed that he had dozens of dragon eggs, appearing to be from different species that he'd been running experiments on, using the gems. It was quickly clear why the dragons of the island were not a fan of his, and I wasn't sure if I should have been stopping him, but soon after, it wouldn't be a decision I'd have to make myself. Now, partway through drawing this one, I realized that it was a very similar framing to when I turned Knuckles into a dinosaur in my famous video game characters as dinosaurs episode, but at the point where I realized that, it was too late into the drawing for me to go back and change his pose again, so I kind of just stuck with it, and I think it still works. This was actually the last dragon that I drew for the episode, so this one I leaned back a little bit more into weirdness for it, because I do 2 other very traditional looking wyverns in this episode. Shadow is coming up next. But also this one I had to lean into weird a little bit more because it was a dragon that fights with its fists. That was just part of the lore for this dragon that I felt like I had to work in because, Knuckles is Knuckles. I also wanted to make this dragon a little bit beefier and burlier than someone like Sonic or Shadow, because Knuckles is generally drawn with very similar proportions, but in terms of his character traits, he's more of a brawler, so I just wanted to add that beefier, burlier kind of look, and I think it works well for this dragon. Not my favorite drawing of the episode, but I am very happy with how it turned out, and I hope you all like it as well. Let's take a look. We entered the final part of the cavern, where Sir Nick kept his 3 gems, but the thing I was most interested in seeing was a large black and red wyvern he had chained up to the wall. It somewhat resembled the Sonic soaring wyvern, but had much more angry energy about it. He told me that dragon had been one of his more successful experiments with the gems, made from the unhatched egg of a native wyvern and enhanced with the power of the gems. The creature had been powerful enough that he had to put enchanted rings on its tails and legs to suppress its abilities. It had also apparently started rebelling against Sir Nick recently, hence it being chained up until he could correct its behavior, or decide how to dispose of it. Now, as Sir Nick was rambling and shuffling around with items and books in the room to show me, I noticed that the dragon's tail had come unchained, and it was slowly sliding across the room towards the gems. I looked up at the dragon, saying nothing, and it looked right back into my eyes with a somewhat questioning look. I simply gave it a slight nod, then looked away. I decided to act merely as an observer unless things got particularly gruesome. The dragon wrapped its tail around the gems and a cascade of various colored sparks shot through its body. Sir Nick whipped around, but it was too late for him to do anything. The shackles on the dragon sparked, then shattered. Its golden suppression rings remained intact, but the dragon was free. It snatched Sir Nick in its claws, then shambled through the cave. I ran after it and leapt onto its back, ready to keep it from killing Sir Nick, as I wasn't sure that was justified yet. But when we burst from the cavern, it flew up into the night air and simply hurled him into the ocean. It soon after let me off onto the ground, gave me a look that I didn't fully know how to interpret, then flew off with the 3 gems, and I didn't see it again for the rest of my time on the island. Now this one, admittedly, for the design, I don't have a ton to say about it that I didn't already say about the Sonic Dragon. I took the similar sort of approach where I was making it a fairly traditional wyvern. I gave it some kind of paws for hands instead of regular claws or whatever. I don't really know where that idea came from, just kind of felt right. I made the head shape a little bit different from the Sonic one, and of course gave this one a bit more of an angry sort of look, but more interesting to me was actually some of the stuff I learned about Shadow when I was researching for this character, because most of the characters in this episode I knew enough about already that I didn't have to read into them too much. But with Shadow, who is admittedly my favorite design character from Sonic, I didn't actually know that the rings on him were meant to suppress his powers. I didn't realize he was that powerful of a character. I think that was a cool little tidbit, and I learned some other stuff that I didn't end up working into this. I just watched a bunch of videos, people talking about his history and things like that, and it did get me more interested in working with other Sonic characters that I haven't worked with before. But yeah, this is another one that I'm quite pleased with, and I hope you all like it as well. Most of you know the mid-dragon video interruption spiel at this point. All of the art from this episode will be available as posters on my Teespring store, and there's lots of other cool things up there too, like ink bundles and t-shirts and things like that. Links in the description, and that was a good quick one. Let's get back into art, shall we? Let's go! Sir Roberto Nick didn't reappear for the rest of my time on the island, and soon after the incident with the dragon that I later called the Soaring Shadow Wyvern, many dragons were entering his cave and leaving with eggs in their mouths or paws, presumably retrieving their young. The one that caught my eye most was a yellow fox-like dragon with flight capabilities unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I wasn't even sure if I should refer to it as a dragon or a drake, as it didn't have any wings, but as I said, it did fly. These dragons, which I called the tail-twirling prowlers, fly by rapidly spinning their two tails to lift them into the air. It looks as though, physically, what it's doing should not be remotely possible, but I have seen dragons do even less to be able to fly, so this creature shouldn't surprise me as much as it does. This dragon seemed about as friendly as the Sonic Soaring Wyverns, but was a bit more on the shy side. When I got too close, it would back away. It was only about 12 feet tall, but did look like it could be particularly powerful as a creature, so its shy nature seemed strange to me. Though I suppose fitting based on what I'd seen from other creatures on the island thus far. Still, the thing that kept me watching this dragon for hours was its very unusual tails. I couldn't help thinking that I had actually seen a dragon fly like that once before, but it may have simply been something from a strange fever dream I'd had long ago. Still, this, along with many other fascinating creatures on the island, made for many more intriguing entries into my ever-growing bestiary. Now, when I realized what I was going to be doing for the Tails Dragon, it was pretty funny to me because never before have I thought about drawing any kind of creature that flies using propeller tails, and now I've done 2 in 1 week, and that's only because, coincidentally, the artificial intelligence that I used to generate the lore in the previous episode this week generated for me a scaly kangaroo dragon that could fly by propelling its tail. So it also gave me a good excuse to practice drawing a propeller kind of effect, and I think I did it fairly well in both of these instances. I used a similar technique. I think I might have liked my execution a little bit better on the Sacaean Daggett from the previous episode, but I still really like how it turned out in this drawing as well. There's nothing particularly interesting to talk about in the design of this one. Kind of just made Tails into a semi-draconic kind of creature, took away the fur, made it a little bit scalier looking. Still wanted it to be cute. Like most of the dragons in this episode, it's a little bit more on the cartoony side in terms of what I usually draw, or maybe I'm just getting that idea from the eyes all being a little bit bigger than I would normally put on more dragons. But overall, this one's pretty simple, but I was kind of going for simple, so I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I hope you all like the Sonic characters as dragons, and let's take a look at the last one. This was definitely a lot of fun doing some, slightly more normal dragons than the previous episode this week. Still trying to decide if I put this in the Best Dragons episode playlist, but we'll see. I am pretty happy with this one. And of course, if you haven't seen the earlier dragon video this week, the one where artificial intelligence wrote the lore for the dragons, I highly recommend checking that out. It's different, but it's pretty funny, and it for sure is in the Best Dragons videos playlist, which I'll link in the cards and all that kind of stuff. But also my third episode of Avengers as Dragons is a pretty good one too. That's a little bit less goofy than that one. And of course, what else do you want to see me do with Sonic characters? Because I had a lot of fun with this, but I did also realize that there's lots of cool Sonic characters I haven't worked with before. It could be cool to do another episode of this, or do another episode of having them as superheroes, or I don't know, a whole bunch of things, but maybe working with some of the slightly less known Sonic characters. Give me all the ideas you want in the comments. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or uplifting note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is something I'm paraphrasing / slightly expanding upon that I read from Jay Shetty earlier this week, which is that if there's something that you're passionate about creating, there is an audience out there that wants to see that thing. You're all the proof you need that there is someone who is clearly interested in that thing you want to make, because you're interested in it. So take a crack at putting it out there into the world. See what happens. I hope that's helpful to someone out there. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday. Goodbye.